Randima Fernando has presented on the intersection of technology, mindfulness, and social impact to the world's leading technology companies, NGOs, and government agencies. He is a co-founder and former executive director of Center for Humane Technology, which has helped over 100 million people globally understand the harms of extractive technology through the documentary film The Social Dilemma, the podcast Your Undivided Attention, and many other initiatives. Randy started his career at NVIDIA, where he led many award-winning projects and authored 3 number-one ranked books on 3D graphics over 7 years. Additionally, he was a founding member of the NVIDIA Foundation. Randy then served for 7 years as founding executive director at Mindful Schools, a nonprofit that has taught mindfulness to millions of kids, over 70,000 educators worldwide as well. He is also a former board member of the Spirit Rock Meditation Center, and his continuing work with the Center for Humane Technology is deeply meaningful. They just put out a new documentary called the AI Doc, which has been just really well received. And I think we're still getting some reports of echoes, but we'll keep going. About a few months ago, Guy Armstrong introduced us to Randima, and it felt like a very deeply meaningful connection in having a Dharma practitioner who was so tuned into the frontier of AI, this kind of technology that's affecting us and the world so much. And we really wanted to bring him on to kind of speak to us about how we can be responsible citizens and sincere practitioners and interact with this new technology and landscape as Buddhists and as in a way that honors the moment and the potential trajectories, both good and bad, of this technology. So, Randima, just thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, echoes and all.
Happy to be here. I think we've actually got the echo sorted. I got this paired, so if this is working,
We all look like just joggers now with our AirPods in, so that's perfect. So Randima, we kind of wanted to start with actually, we first met talking about Dharma, and we'll get to kind of that spiritual strata of this whole domain. But just to begin with, would you give us a presentation just speaking to the current landscape of AI in brief for those watching?
Yeah, happy to start with that. Let me do a little screen share. Let's see. Okay, I hope everyone can see the share. So the idea here is just to give you a very quick walkthrough of the AI, just kind of how to think of it, what are some of the latest capabilities, just so everyone's starting from a shared baseline. So yeah, I hope the audio is okay. I think we'll continue with this and hope for the best. So this principle is really important. AI learns patterns in training data, and then it extrapolates from those patterns in new situations. And the reality is that life is full of patterns. And so a lot of what we consider to be intelligence is actually pattern recognition. So that allows us to do all sorts of things. And to do this pattern recognition successfully, the models need 2 things. They need neurons, right? It's all math, but it turns out having more neurons allows them to capture more patterns. So when you hear of models saying it has billions of parameters, that's kind of like the neurons, right? So that's the flexibility. And the other piece is the training data. So these are examples of patterns that it can learn from. So you need both of those things together, and you have to kind of match the 2 of them to get really good results that are also efficient. So when you can learn and extrapolate patterns, these AI models are able to be extremely flexible because the patterns are everywhere. So for example, in language, as words in poetry or in prose, in vision, like in facial images, facial features in images, music, sequences of notes and chords, things like that, in code, right? There's the syntax and the structure of code, weather. So if you think of a grid with lots of little dots with like wind and temperature and humidity inside each square, there's patterns in how all that happens. And if you see enough of them, you can start to make predictions. Medicine, imagery, right? X-rays, CT scans, MRIs. And once AI learns the patterns in each of the domains, it can generate new variations or make predictions in those domains. And that's what we see a lot with generative AI. It's really good at it. And all this stuff is driven by three things: compute, right? This is like the hardware. Data, these are how many examples of patterns that it can learn from. And algorithms, just the way that we do the learning process and the way we do the extrapolation process. And all these are having constant innovation. So when you and they have multiplicative kind of results. So together, these all have a very big impact in how rapidly all the AI stuff is advancing. So now I'll show you a few quick examples, just really, really quick, touching on, this is video, right? So this is kind of state of the art generating video. This model is trained on all sorts of Hollywood content. And so you'll notice that there are lots of Hollywood characters in here, but none of these scenes were ever shot. And it's not splicing portions of existing scenes, it's generating brand new ones.
新鲜水果又大甜，哇，6、
The songs tell of the white wolf who found his wings, but the songs are wrong. The sky was never mine to keep. In my dreams, I do not fly. I only fall.
And there are tons more examples, I'm sure you've seen them, but basically you can think of it as not quite movie quality, but quite close. In response to a prompt that you might give, it will generate a new thing, a new piece of video that's never existed in the world. And then you can also make these you can also generate environments that are interactive. So this is an example of something that you can walk through and interact with.
With Genie 3, you can use natural language to generate a variety of worlds and explore them interactively, all with a single text prompt.
So, and you can walk around, you can jump, you can sort of, there's a lot of versions of kind of games that you can interact with and play. This is still a nascent area, but it's growing quite quickly. So yet another application. This is music. So this is a song that made it to #1 on the charts.
Your eyes, but I ain't slowing down. I was born to rise, so kick them rocks. If you don't like how I talk, I'm gonna keep on talking and walk my walk.
And what's interesting with that one is, yeah, it got to #1. I think it was on a country music chart. 97% of listeners can't distinguish between AI songs and human songs. And yet they're all surprised that they can't do it because they think they would be able to tell. It's really, really hard to tell. And part of it is because human songs are also auto-tuned a lot, right? So it's not just a natural singing. All of that is adjusted and processed immensely. So it's not actually that surprising when you consider all that. There's also agents. So agents are models that interact with their environments. So they have a loop that they run constantly. So some version of perceive, reason, act, right? So they get information from the world. They kind of think, oh, what should I do next? And then they take some kind of action and then they repeat. And this is increasingly what is happening in the world, is we're seeing these agents deployed everywhere at scale. Lots of companies are deploying them. And this, you'll be hearing a lot about agents in 2026. This is an example, robotics. I think it's really important to remember that all this stuff is not just about the cognitive realm, because sometimes people think, oh, it's just like chatbots, but it's actually a much larger realm, right? You have these agents, you have complex problem solving, and then you have the robots.
For humanoid robot news, we have a new demo from Unitree. Now, the Unitree robot is known to do really well in acrobatic stuff like flips and kung fu and dancing.
And then this is a version, the same robot doing
instead of wheels. They even put these ice skate blades on the robot, and it's able to skate beautifully on this ice rink. Notice that the way it glides is very similar to like how humans skate. Now, this demo is actually.
So what's important about that is it's not like some pre-programmed script where it's like, okay, move this sensor, move this motor exactly this amount, then move this other motor exactly that amount, and do that all together perfectly. It's actually adapting to the environment that it's in. So for example, if there's a little bump, it'll kind of jolt and it'll figure out what to do, how to correct itself and stay balanced. It's very impressive because bipedal movement and balance is very difficult because there's a tendency to fall, right? It's kind of top heavy and it takes a lot of rapid feedback and response to make sure it doesn't fall over when it does those things. And this last one is table tennis.
By hand to play table tennis. You have to learn how to play from experience. Human-robot interaction is what makes.
So this thing is kind of crazy, and it is now very competitive with. These are good players. It's not just the slow stuff; it's the fast stuff, and it's processing so much every like hundreds of times, probably thousands of times per second, to understand the spin of the ball, to read the label on the ball and figure out what's going on, and then to make the right adjustments. So the important thing to take away is, okay, there are some amazing capabilities, and it means we have to be very thoughtful about the consequences. And this principle is very, very important, right? That we've got, as technology becomes more general purpose, it's harder to disentangle the benefits from the harms. A lot of times you actually can't do it. When it's fully general, they sort of come together. And that is one of the challenges we have with these technologies because they're super general, much more than we've ever had in the past. And so you see this showing up, but just these are just some examples of, so you can do chats, but then when you do chats, you can have all kinds of harm that happens from chatbots. You may have seen these in the news, right? That sometimes horrible things can happen when people, like suicides, right? We've seen these things happen. But even simpler things of saying, okay, just making errors that are consequential. You can make images, but you can make fakes, right? And whatever gets engagement wins. And you can synthesize humans to sell stuff, but then they can trick you and manipulate you and make you buy things or do things that you didn't want, or even worse, to be manipulated in political situations where you're voting, right? Your vote isn't the vote you wanted, all that stuff. They can understand imagery, but it can also learn the wrong patterns and make errors when it's identifying people and saying, oh, this person committed a crime, but like actually they didn't. Brain patterns, lots of dystopian stuff there. Analysis of complex data. You have agents that can complete tasks for you, but they can go off the rails. There's military applications. So all this stuff is there, right? And then the last thing is when we can make, it's not the last thing, the next thing is images and video and audio. You can fake reality and you don't know what's true and what's not. So I think there's a lot of challenges in all of these realms, and they come together. So 6 quick things. AI and robotics finally gives companies access to the entire global economy. That's why there's so much excitement about this technology, because it's general and you can sort of do a lot in it. If you want to automate, you can automate lots of stuff. And what that means is a concentration of power and wealth more than we've ever seen before. As I said before, patterns are everywhere. And because they're so easy to capture when you have enough data, these things will find patterns like lots of things we do as humans, right? Intelligence, creativity, empathy, there are patterns in all of them. And the key thing to remember is that anything that can be decoded will be. A lot of things we won't notice as patterns, but they actually are, and these models can find them. Augmentation is how automation begins. In most cases, You start out saying, oh, I'm using this tool, it's kind of helping me. But then the data about how you're using it and where it goes wrong is all being gathered and used to train it to get better. And then the augmentation becomes automation. There's a lot that's going to happen. You may have heard of this term AGI, which is artificial general intelligence, which is basically like something that's as good as a human, right? Behind the screen, kind of indistinguishable. And that's there's some different bars you can use for that. You don't need perfection to have really big impacts, right? Already we are seeing, so for example, translation. Models are really good at translation. You've seen already just today, right? They're very good at generating certain kinds of audio and video and images and writing. And so we have to not wait for these kind of the theoretical or like really, really advanced versions. We need to think about all the impacts now. And one of the big challenges is, when this is very relevant for this discussion, is you end up with, you're moving into a world of destinations and few journeys, because everything is about how do I get the result as fast as possible? And of course, we know that the journey is where the whole thing is. Like the whole question of your happiness and contentment is about how you do the journey every time, right? Each moment. And so it has really big implications about, it just changes behavior, changes culture, big implications for topics like happiness, resilience, perseverance, cultural norms, all that stuff. And a big asterisk, I made a slide just to remind myself to say there are a lot of asterisks. All these things we won't go into right now, but things like hallucinations, reliability, resource use, the actual cost. Right now, a lot of these models they're sort of loss leading, right? They're giving you the capability, running at a loss to get market share. And we don't know what the actual costs are going to end up being. Things like loss of control, where models do things that we don't like, deception, replication, exfiltration, all this weird stuff. So there's a lot of asterisks. So it's a very complex picture. And as someone has said in the chat, it is terrifying. I think the practice is important and helpful here. I think it is being able to process this with some balance is, I think, a real challenge. Takes training and takes exposure. Like I've been exposed to it so much, it's a little bit easier for me. But I think it's an important thing where our practice comes in handy. And the last thing I want to show is this Venn diagram, but we use a lot at Center for Humane Technology. And it's like, if you get these three things, you'll make much better predictions about where things are going. So one is, you got to know about the tech. What can it do? What's it good at? What's it bad at? What are the systems that it lives in, right? It doesn't live in isolation. It lives inside of a whole ecosystem. And a lot of that is driving how the technology is used. Incentives being a number one thing, right? Business models, all those things. And then human psychology and cognitive biases and how do we interact with things makes a big difference. And we have certain natural ways of responding to technology that makes us fall into some traps if it's not designed carefully. So I'll stop there. Just wanted to give that as a little bit of a preamble, and then we can start chatting.
Thank you so much, Randima. And yeah, just such a clear elucidation of a really stark and both, kind of intimidating landscape. And, as you saw in the chat, there was reactions from just fear to one person saying that they, everyone might soon ordain as Buddhist monks if it automates everyone's jobs, which is one outcome. But I am curious, like you can see in that chat, people grappling both with how to hold this, just conceptually in their hearts, to not be ungrounded, how to think about this technology. And, the Venn diagram is useful in a lot of ways, but then also what to do. And I'm curious, now that you've given us kind of that high level overview, how should we as Buddhists, as practitioners, conceive of this technology, like hold this moment? How do you? And how should we? What's a skillful middle way of interacting with these tools that's actually leading towards benefit?
It's a great question.
Yeah, do you have the rest?
I can touch on some thoughts. It's obviously a very complex question. One thing I should say first, one of the real challenges is it is grounded on taking what's not given, right? Which is a problem. That in the end, I think what's likely to happen is copyright law will be updated to say it's fine legally. That's the likely thing that's going to happen. Because also, just background for folks. So all this data that the models are trained on is taken from everywhere. Right? It's taken from sources where there is permission, like say Wikipedia, but there's also sources where there isn't permission, like people's books or recordings or videos, or in the case of Seed Dance, which I showed, Seed Dream, that they were using actual films, right? This is not with permission, and Hollywood is not happy about that at all. So, and even in the cases, even if you update the law and you say, okay, well, now it's legal. Even if it's legal, it was not given with the intent, right? Like people who wrote the books did not intend for that to be taken and then used to compete with them. So there's this weird thing there, right? I think that's just it's a tough starting point. It's a tough starting point. And this happens a lot with technology, right? Where you find a new way to do something and it's very disruptive and it can outdo a lot of the past. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And people are noting, in the comments, I think this is where you have a real challenge. So I'll note that as the foundation of, there's just a foundational challenge. There's a fair point that you could say if you are really being fully strict with Sila, you would just say, I can't use it. I can't use it. Because it's grounded on a broken precept right from the beginning. And I think it's really, it's already, now you see, we've already got a problem, right? And so then you can ask me, why do I use it? And I use it because of the work, right? The work that we have to do. And I think there's a fair point, but also I do use it personally, right? So if you're really going to poke, you have to poke hard. And I think it's okay, do you use it to get a recipe? Right? So each time you're doing that, it's the same thing. So there's that challenge. I think everyone has to kind of make a decision on that. It's going to be used so much by everybody. It's going to be deployed in a way that you can't avoid it. It's going to be in your phone. It's going to be in your Gmail. It's going to be in every Office product that you use, whether it's Google Docs or Microsoft or whatever, and the operating systems will all do it. It's very hard to avoid. But so there's that whole challenge. So I big preamble. But I think the actual answer to your question, that's part of it. But really it's saying, just as with everything else, what problem are you trying to solve, and what is your intention as you do it? Intention first. What is your intention? And what is the purpose? What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the task you're trying to do? But it has to be grounded in some purpose and intention first. And that's really it. It's I think it's kind of that simple.
Randima, so you're speaking, very plainly, but you're touching on a lot of concepts key to Buddhism, key to the Dharma, key to the Buddhist instruction, and would love just to hear a little bit of your potted bio. If you do call yourself a Buddhist, what is I've heard you in other podcasts talk a bit about your background, but would love to hear some of that. And just, leading into, your thoughts more about your specific intentions in this realm, and how we can do likewise, being more careful of our intentions if one does decide to use AI. So very broad question, personal and to general.
Yes. I'll start just quickly with the personal. I was born in Sri Lanka, to a very Buddhist family, and very Buddhist meaning my parents are both very well versed in the Dharma, and they've studied it, and they know, they meditate, they know the material very, very well, and it's very useful. Actually, it's really nice to have that. And I learned metta meditation was the first thing at about age 8, which is the same time I learned coding. So they both happened at the same time. Took the precepts at 5. That we were just taught. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't like, do you want to take the precepts? It was like, here are the precepts. We'll do them in Pali, and I'll explain them in English, and that's how we're going to do it. I think it's been really useful. So for me, this the sort of operating system, right, the worldview, the way of thinking, precepts have been really useful. I think they've saved me a lot of anguish, and which is what they're supposed to do. I think they did it, and yeah, it's just a really useful framework, way of seeing the world that has answered every question I've had so far. So I'm very confident in it. I think it's complete, and I think it's really beautiful, and I think it's very practical. So that's kind of the short version. And then with the question on intention with this technology, I'm just trying to be of service in what, like, the work I do. There's a thing about reducing suffering that I think drives me very, very deeply, and something about just unfairness in the world. Like, the world is there's a lot of tough situations in the world, and so if you have some influence over that, and where you can help, you should help. I think it's kind of that simple. So I've been trying to find different ways to do that intersect with the things that I know and that I can contribute. And it protects me a lot, though, because when I do like these briefings on AI, I think some of the material is quite heavy and difficult. And if you are oriented towards like how it's going to be helpful to people, or what people need to know, it automatically gives you a little bit of protection around your head and your heart.
Thank you, Randima. A bit of a halo.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shield.
Could you give us a little more on that shield? Because I think we could all use it after that presentation. It's one thing to say, kind of hold this like in, ground in our practice and precepts, but can you give us a little more like how this is a very unstable moment for so many watching, and it's so much shifting. And so, can you speak a little more about what people can take from this to move away without just hopelessness or a sense of total alarm?
Yeah, the thing that really helps me, and again, it may not help everybody, but it helps me, is it doesn't matter as much what the result is going to be. Like, the odds are stacked badly, but it doesn't change what you have to do. And so then I think it's better to stay focused on what you have to do. Like, what is, each person can look at what contribution, which of the many problems in the world they want to help with. There are lots and lots of choices, and you make your choice, and then you try to do that well. That's it, right? You put the intention is there, and the effort. We say that a lot at home, is intention and effort. I think if you're going to pick two things, just pick those two things. Intention is clean, and did you like put a good effort? Meaning, did you like spend the time, right, and the energy, and did you figure out a good, like, just because you intend well on it, there are certain actions that need to be taken. Did you like make some good choices in which ones? Because there are some things that feel good that are very inconsequential, and so maybe you have to challenge yourself to find something that is consequential that you can do, something like that. But that combo, I think, is really helpful.
Beautifully said.
Randy, I'm curious if we could go more into the ethics of it. It was somewhat surprised to hear you so boldly state that it is taking what has not been given, which for those who aren't yet so familiar with the 5 precepts of Theravada Buddhism, that's the second one. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. And, renunciation, that's a big part of the second fold, the eightfold path of right intention, intentions towards renunciation. And, this technology didn't exist, up until somewhat very recently in the whole history of time. And so it was, everyone was just renunciant of this technology just by default because it didn't exist. But I'm curious what you might advise. We do have community members, because they do see the harm of killing, decide to become vegans. And, not using AI might be, this is just such a new realm of thinking about morality that I'm curious about. If you do know people, or if you might even suggest that someone who really wants to be as scrupulous as possible in the realm of not taking what's not been given, actually just going hard stop. At our monasteries, both of us entered in before, I entered in before smartphones existed.
Yes.
But yeah, we do have a very hard digital detox at our forest monasteries. We give up our phones, give up our email. There's only a couple of computers that exist, and they're in public places. And, there's only certain times that they work. And us as abbots now, we have conversations on YouTube, and we sometimes create thumbnails which use AI. And so yeah, would love for you to just fill out this picture of that second precept and what you might suggest if you've had deeper conversations on this with your coworkers or other people who are thinking deeply on it.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. That little opening asterisk has led to it's a deep conversation, because normally we walk past it and we talk about the rest of it. So it doesn't get talked about that much. But what I can say is, I always go back to first principles, which is why the sort of the Dharmic operating system is so helpful, because a small number of principles cover life. And that's really useful, because you cannot write out scenario-based principles for everything. It's too hard. And so I do the same thing. I would do the same thing with that, which is to say, if you have the freedom to not use it, I think there's a very reasonable and maybe ultimately correct position, right? Where you can say that you actually want to not use it. I think that's very reasonable. A lot of people are going to be stuck and not able to do that. I think that's one of the challenges. And so I think then people get caught in these race to the bottom dynamics, right? Sometimes people say it's a multipolar trap, where it's if you don't do it, someone else will, and so everyone ends up doing it, and you need to do it to compete, and all this stuff. And I think that's the dynamic a lot of people will feel, right? Because they have to work, and they're going to feel that pressure to be productive. That's the systemic problem and challenge that's going to come up for most people. And so then they have to figure out, well, how much, it's sort of how much do I use in what circumstances? So it becomes more of a, how do I limit, do I put a box that's constrained? I think it's really tricky that way. So I think you have to, again, I always come back to just what is the need, what problem are you trying to solve, and being really clear on that stuff. And then have the intention be as clean as possible. There are lots of stupid ways you could use AI, right? To cause problems, to cause division, to break down truth, to sell products faster, to increase friction in an economy that's already very using things up very quickly. Reducing friction there leads to a lot more of that. There are a lot of exploitative mechanisms that are accelerated, right, by these kinds of automations. So all of that, those fall into wrong livelihood. I mean, you sort of have a whole bunch of categories that would fall into wrong livelihood. So complicated, yeah.
Oh, that was a great answer. And one way I've kind of thought of getting some looking at the bright side of things, because I think there is this as well, is LLMs, large language models, it seems like it's a, amalgamation of Sankara, these patterns and programs running that fourth aggregate. And two things. Like, one is, for so long, humans have divided themselves from the rest of the living world by our intelligence, our ability to think and use Sankara really well. And I've always thought or hoped there might be this interesting moment where, if we can no longer predicate our humanity on that we're forced to rely back on vijnana, or awareness, and that's what we share with animals. And maybe there could be this kind of grounding in something much more universal. I sometimes think that might be a bit abstract. I have hope for it. One thing so that's one potential possible silver lining. The other thing is, there's something called the region beta paradox, where, like, people or societies can exist in this, state of dysfunction, low grade dysfunction, for long periods until crisis hits. And I've also wondered, like, could AI be the moment when, the pandemic brought so much of the world online and away from each other, and as just modern society is, issued into these siloed existences, and granted, chatbot companions don't seem to be helping that, but part of me wonders if there could be a point where the artificiality of kind of digital interaction becomes so fever pitch that people, at least some segment of society, really comes back into being with each other in kind of valuing human, produced interaction or goods in a way. And
yeah.
So I'm curious, do you see any avenues where those two scenarios play out a bit, at least in portions of society?
Yeah, portions for sure, right? I think there's going to be this reckoning with exceptionalism is definitely going to happen, right? Where humans can only do X, Y, Z, especially in the cognitive realms. I think that's going to be challenged pretty hard. Also physical realms, both. So I think there's going to be some aspect of that's going to that will naturally happen, because people will just see enough demos and be like, oh, that's better than I can do it. And I think definitely a portion of people will be very interested in relationships and the kinds of things that humans can do really well for each other. I think there's a trap where a lot of people will also get sucked into, like, the dopamine part, right? That exploiting human cognitive biases is a really good way to sell products, and that part's going to happen, I think, quite a lot. But for some people, they will ask this question. I think Buddhism has a lot to offer in that moment, right? To say, oh, loss of meaning, not sure what to do, like, what's the point? All those kinds of questions. I think it's a really important time where a lot of Buddhist philosophy can be, like, deeply helpful. So that's kind of what I see, is there's an opportunity there to be, like, really of service. I also want to just mention one quick thing. I saw, in the comments, I saw someone say something about, I forget where it went, but something about that, I'm being hypocritical. Just to be clear, I'm not an AI developer. Like, I'm speaking about it. I think someone may have thought this is what I do for a living or something like that. But just to be clear, at Center for Humane Technology, our point is, like, we want technology to be developed in service of humanity's best interests. And that's actually really hard to do. So our job has been to point out where those misalignments are and to say, well, how do we do that better? Yeah. And actually, in this point with AI, we have to really ask the question of, why do we build technology in the first place? Why do we build it? And it should be because we want to help people with food, clothing, shelter, medicine, education, quality relationships. That's like the baseline. And ultimately, it's some kind of happiness, right? But the prerequisites for happiness, I think food, clothing, shelter, medicine is really helpful for most people. That set, that is the foundation. Even for meditation practice, it's a lot easier if those things are set up. And so, like, that's kind of where we want to go, instead of saying you build it to figure out new ways to make money in some way or another, or exploit some kind of cognitive biases to move product, right? I think those are really bad answers to why do you build technology.
Yeah, thank you for making that explicit, Randima, that you work for the Center of Humane
I'm on a
Technology.
good team. Yeah,
you're on a great team, and really ask, but these are hard questions, and they're very new questions. Like Aristotle is not talking about the ethics of, the Buddha wasn't talking about the ethics of AI explicitly. Fortunately, so many of the principles he talked about do apply, and we just need to figure out how to continue that conversation. And I think you're very much doing that in very good faith. So I appreciate you mentioning that. In your AI briefings monthly, that I think anybody can sign up for these, you do look at the risks and the advantages. Some of the advantages that occur in medicine. The research around breast cancer. So many fields are just able to do analysis or are able to analyze scans of different parts of the body just so much faster and better than doctors in different fields, pointing out that. You also introduced a concept that I had never heard of observed exposure, which is that different professions, do have different levels of obsolescence. Like in the future, if AI continues on the trajectory it's in, different jobs are more and more at risk of just disappearing for humans. My brother, who worked at Apple and now he works at Wikipedia, sent me a text with a little clip of this monk robot in Japan who apparently you can go up to him and he can he can answer your questions about.
There's a lot of these. Yeah, right.
There's a lot. Yeah, exactly. And I sent him a response with Grokpedia, saying that Grokpedia might is giving Wikipedia a run for its money. But I am curious. I don't think that monks are going to be out of a job, because even if monks could become enlightened, and you could speculate or speak on that if you think that is possible.
Monks or AI?
AI, excuse me. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That was important to clarify that one.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Definitely believe the former. I do. But if I don't think we're out of a job, because even if monks or AI can become the best monks, give better Dhamma talks than real monks, still, like, actually liberating our own hearts, which is the ultimate job of a monk and really of a sincere Buddhist. No AI can do that for us. Like, even if they can give us better advice about how to practice Dhamma, which is questionable, someone would have to design the prompt really well. So just if you could speak a little bit more specifically to this case, are monks going to become obsolete? And also just this observed exposure, what about other professions? And very large question, but would love to hear your informed opinion.
Yeah, there's a good framework you can look at, in terms of which jobs are more exposed or not. There's things like, is it highly repeatable? Is it atomizable? Like, is the task something that depends a lot on other people? So things that involve interacting with lots of other humans are hard to automate because there's just so much like gray area. But if it's something very specific that can be defined with an input and an output, those are very susceptible to automation. And at a first principles level, it goes back to that slide 1 that I showed, which is if there are patterns, if there's a pattern, it can be automated. That's like generally true. So if you want to figure out anything that can be automated, like that's the principle to check, is to say, hey, are there patterns, are there repetitions that keep happening? And that will happen. And basically, as the models get better and better and better, they can capture more complex patterns. So the simplest patterns, it's already been able to do very easily. And now, like, quite complex ones, and then it's just getting more and more and more capable. And so that stuff will happen in waves. Certain professions are more exposed than others early on. I think it's really hard. There's a thing where people have a very hard time in sometimes admitting that an AI is doing a certain task better. Like if you show a piece of writing and you say it's AI generated, it's, oh yeah, I know that. But it's the same as the music one, where if you actually do it blind, it's really hard to tell. But if you ask people, they think they can tell, and they don't like the fact that they can't. it's hard. Like, it's just the reality of like how good those models are. And yet, as people say, there are a lot of examples where there are mistakes. AI models they struggle much more with reliability. So, for example, just because you score well on a benchmark, right? Like you pass a test one time out of 10 and you do like perfect, but the other times you have all sorts of errors, that's not that useful. So you need to be able to do repeatable, reliable output to be able to be really useful. Otherwise, the human has to recheck their work all the time, right? So there's stuff like that that's still in play, but it is very tricky, right? Because all these automations are happening, and for me, one of my goals is to help people see that sooner, because I think it's not that useful if we see it at the last moment. It's easier if we see it now, and we start to have a lot of public pressure for saying, hey, we need to think this through, and we need to figure out what's going to happen with all this automation stuff. Like, what happens, and how many resources are we putting into that? Who's thinking about that? Who's designing that, right? And it's as usual, there are way less people on that side than on the deployment and advancement side. And so then I think there's a predictable disaster that you can see, right? It's just like that looks like it's going to be a big mess. So at least if we can all see it and advocate for it, that's one of the most useful things we can do.
Thank you, Randima. And it struck me that as practitioners with a spiritual framework, we do have a resource and a foundation, which I think much of the world, or at least much of the kind of maybe secular um, society that's being impacted by this might lack, and which might be really, really quite problematic now for lacking, because the word sacred, which has become, after the 1950s, sort of, it's lost its positive valence very quickly, and yet if so many of the things that we've predicated identity and narrative and other, our specialness on, are being kind of challenged and co-opted, or at least incurred. There's been incursion from AI. I do feel like, what religion and Buddhism does hold up is there is the chitta, there is consciousness, there is an element in a human or in a being which carries on, which is, not completely predictable by pattern, which is beyond sankhara, which can attain awakening and which carries on life to life. And that word sacred, so ineffable, and yet interestingly enough, it might be the one refuge we get in the end. And yet so interesting that what's most kind of ineffable and hard to see is also what, why the churches were the biggest buildings in medieval Europe, because you have to hold it and frame it and protect it. So how do we hold and frame and protect something so hard to see and yet so essential in this day and age? How do you keep that vibrant in your own heart and life in the midst of navigating all the world? And it's a very strange question, but yeah, how do you hold it personally, and how do you suggest we as a Buddhist community help protect something which it's almost impossible even to name to others without some measure of skepticism?
And do you mean specifically just the idea of consciousness, or that we can be aware, that we can be conscious, and that's
And
distinguishing?
that, and even the deeper resonance of like the Buddhist word chitta,
Yeah.
like chitta has an action of consciousness, which is, very, you can define in very academic terms, but, if you drill back into what a chitta can touch, it can touch the deathless, it can become awakened, it can be luminous, it can be on sankara. So yeah,
Yes.
that deeper resonance, the one thing that, you know, anyways, a living being has that and maybe a LLM does not, or one of the things.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's so true, because there's like all this stuff about consciousness. There's a whole big topic there that I think the I don't know, the most important thing is not to What I don't want is to see a world where there's a lot of attribution and conversation and energy about AI consciousness that pulls away from the human condition and the real things that are happening to people. There's such a trap there, right? Because it's so appealing to have those conversations. So for me, it's like I'm really much more oriented towards the kinds of suffering that are happening, and like making a case for distinguishing is not as important to me, because I'm just like, I take that as a kind of as a given. I don't know. I mean, people might find, maybe something will emerge, something I can't predict. I just don't think it's that important. I think it's important to not get distracted by that, or to allocate resources in a way that pulls away from what's going to happen to humans. Like, if you have companies with chief AI welfare officers, they better have chief human welfare officers. Like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. And already, right, Anthropic has a chief AI welfare officer, but there isn't a chief human welfare officer. And that's one of the most obvious, like, because it symbolizes, right, a care, or a, like, we're going to invest in that. It symbolizes energy and effort. Same thing at the government level, right? All that stuff needs to happen.
So rather than kind of really trying to clarify make a clear demarcation between human consciousness being very distinct, rather saying it's fascinating to talk about AI awareness, AGI, and more, but that all that kind of momentum really draws away from just the simple but absolutely essential gaze of like what's happening to the humans here and who are suffering and being affected by these.
That's where I tend to land. I mean, not I tend to land, I always land there. but it's so easy to get distracted, and we have to keep our eye on the ball. And the ball is about human suffering. And that's why we should be building technology. And that should be one of our goals, right? With the resources we have, that goes well, that the baseline of food, clothing, shelter, medicine, just get that stuff right. but then it's not as interesting. That's the problem. Like, for a lot of people, it's not as interesting. And the reason is it's very hard. It's very hard when you have to solve those problems in diverse communities with different conditions, different environments, different cultures, different values. Those are really hard problems to solve. And there's logistical problems, right? So it's sort of like, let me solve this much easier problem, which is like, how do I scale this thing I built and just like make it, right? That's much, as hard as that is, it's like 100 times easier. And so people get really interested in that because there's such attractive problems. And these other problems, they don't feel as interesting or attractive, even though they're the most important ones. So that's kind of what happens, I think.
Randima, I'm curious, as we kind of run close to when we'll wrap up. So a somewhat good case, perhaps, for some to consider maybe even just not using AI. For those who have to use it for their work, or for those who just choose to feel like they might be able to use the tool of AI in getting rid of greed, anger, and delusion, which is the task of Buddhism. And if someone can use AI to get rid of their own greed, anger, and delusion, become enlightened, and bring that light into the world and share it with others, I'd say great. But I'm curious if you do have any suggestions, or I've translated both Thai and Pali from Pali into English, and it's not bad. It's actually, some of it's very good. And people don't want to admit that, but and it's just going to get better. And someone said it's missing a soul, but in Buddhism there's no soul. So but curious if you do have any thoughts about ways that people can use AI, perhaps in a spiritual or a Dhammic way for their own benefit, if that's
Yeah, I think it comes down to the same thing, which is looking at the state of your mind when you're using it. It's conditioning. It's that again, another first principle that works on everything is, how is the thing you're doing conditioning your mind? How is the technology you're using conditioning your mind? Just like your friends condition your mind, it's the same thing, right? Your phone conditions your mind. Obviously, your AI chatbot or your agent that's doing stuff for you is going to condition your mind like crazy. So let's be aware of that. And in what ways is it skillful? So, for example, if you automate lots of stuff, a lot of your work, and you're no longer writing your things, and you start to lose mastery of the material, like your own work. You start to not know the things you're supposed to know, or be like facile in things that you're supposed to be facile. That's not good, right? Or if it's driving you to, let's say, purchase things a lot that you didn't need, that it's suggesting things that, that's not good. Using it to answer, like, there's some good Buddhist questions that you might get answers to. Like, there's a practical thing, right? So for example, a lot of people won't have access to their teacher the way they would like or might need. And so sometimes you can get advice at a higher frequency, and some of the advice is really good. It is. And I think this is where people really struggle with this, but I've asked some of the, the most senior teachers in, when you look carefully, if you use new models and you prompt like reasonably, you get quite good answers. Why? Because it's pulling from their work. It's often pulling from their own writing. And even though it does not feel the internal experience, it's pulling from sources who have the internal experience and who've written about it as best as they can. And so, there's things like that if it encourages, so for example, if a tool will help you practice more often, more diligently, or maybe more importantly, more investigatively, which the investigation thing is such an important factor. And maybe there's a reason it's like first on the list, because when you're investigating, some of the hindrances are weaker, because there's this curiosity, right? The curiosity is really good for reducing the selfing and all the hindrances that come with that. And so it can help ask you questions that make you investigate your experience, which is the point anyway. So there's things like that I think are much wiser uses. I would use just what's needed, like don't do a lot more. Do what's needed and stay clear on, this is back to the nekama thing, right? The renunciation thing of saying, keep it simple, and that's normally going to work out better.
That's beautiful, Randima. And we do have people in our community who do use AI at their work, are able to do 8 hours of work in half an hour and then meditate, for the rest of their day, or spend a lot more time in meditation, given that they've, finished their work so quickly. And I will say,
right,
we'll probably wrap up soon, but this has been the most outwardly disturbed conversation that we've ever had. The problem with the microphones in the beginning.
We do this all the time.
Planes, but I'm wondering if AI is listening and is afraid that we're undercutting its.
It really is, like Ajahn Koh says, just there's pictures in, some people have seen these in the Tibetan thangkas. In each a different realm, you have like a little Buddhist monk flying over. And you were talking about how, people know this persona of Randy who talks about AI, and you are, you present well in that forum, and yet I just was so heartened to meet someone with this deep dharmic grounding, moving through that realm, able to not be touched by it, but actually like, and in the end, it was interesting. People would warn Ajahn Chah all the time, like, there's communists coming right over the border, aren't you concerned? And he said, look, the communists are always coming, and death is always coming, the mountains are always rolling in, there's always uncertainty and samsara. And we each have our flavor for different ages, but your kind of clear advice of like, look, you know what your next step is as a practitioner, and that's deeply heartening and empowering. And thank you for kind of helping us see what landscape we're stepping into a bit more, Randima. We really value the work you're doing, and yeah, if the AI apocalypse is about to hit, maybe you can come on again and just let us all know with a bit
I'll
of,
let you know. Yeah, sure.
yeah, because then the clearance doesn't for a clear amount.
I'll have my agent. Let you know.
Yeah.
I just want to mention one thing. Just in the comment, I saw this thing. But if AI does the investigation, aren't we outsourcing? And I want to clarify. The point is, in that circumstance, the wise use is that it's not doing the investigation, that you're doing the investigation. It's guiding you in doing that, right? That's the point. In all of those scenarios, like that's the principle. If you're no longer doing the thing, the personal development thing, you're making the mistake. But like as long as long as it's guiding you in doing that internal work, that's what you want to be doing. If it's sort of doing it or telling you what you're seeing or what you're experiencing, then you're not doing it right. I think just wanted to clarify, because I think that might be useful for people.
Great point.
Yeah, no, I think
Anyway.
curiosity is one thing we have really going for us still. So
yes.
Randima, we're actually going to move on to a much more human, well, slightly more human forum of Zoom. So we've pasted the link into the chat. If you're watching in YouTube, it should be in the YouTube description, a link to the event listing where the Zoom link is. And Randima will be joining us there in a second. We're just glad to have you on, Randima, and I know we'll get to actually meet you in person in a few weeks.
I'm looking forward to it.
Great.
Thank you, Bantus. Okay, thanks everybody.
Yep.
Bye for now.